The Friday night rush was in full swing, the kind that made the neon sign outside flicker brighter as if trying to keep up with the heartbeat inside the diner. Plates clattered, voices overlapped, and the smell of frying onions hung stubbornly in the air. At first glance, it was just another busy night, nothing unusual. But then a sharp crash sliced through the noise, a tray hitting the floor, cups shattering across the tiles. The room went still for a breath. In the center of it all stood a young waitress, her right hand trembling as she bent to gather the mess. Her left arm was locked in a thick cast that ran from shoulder to wrist. She wasn't fast enough, not with one arm bound tight against her side. Coffee dripped across the floor in thin streams as she whispered an apology to no one in particular. Her face flushed, but she never once lifted her eyes to meet the stares pressing in on her. At a booth in the corner, a man watched silently. He looked ordinary in his rolled-up sleeves and worn jeans, like just another face in the crowd. He stirred his coffee slowly, but his attention never left the young woman. To anyone else he was a stranger passing through, but in truth, he was here with a reason that had nothing to do with the food. Ethan Cross wasn't just another customer. He was the man who owned this chain of diners, and tonight he was undercover. He had come searching for answers about poor performance reports, financial inconsistencies, and low staff morale. What he hadn't expected was the waitress. She moved with a quiet determination that contradicted the cast on her arm, juggling trays with her good hand, forcing a polite smile even when the manager barked at her to hurry. Every step she took seemed to sting, but she never stopped moving. The manager's voice was sharp again, loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. "Faster, Lila. You think the customers are going to wait around for you all night?" His words weren't cruel in volume alone. They carried a sting of dismissal, as though her struggle was more of an inconvenience than a hardship. A few people in the diner shook their heads, muttered under their breath, but nobody spoke up. Not even her fellow servers, who traded quick glances and kept their distance. Ethan's jaw tightened as he remembered nights from his own childhood, when his mother had come home from a shift at a diner not so different from this one. He could still picture her slipping off her shoes, wincing from swollen feet, forcing a smile as though the pain didn't matter. She too had served customers long past the point of exhaustion. Watching Lila now felt like looking back through time, at a memory he had tried hard to leave behind. But unlike his mother, this young woman had the added weight of a broken arm. Every move she made required twice the effort. She bent to wipe the floor with one hand, fumbling with a rag while the manager muttered about clumsiness. Then she straightened, squaring her shoulders as if determined not to let the humiliation break her. For a brief moment, she smiled at a child who had been staring at her. The little boy laughed, dropping his spoon, and she crouched awkwardly, picking it up with her one free hand. "You're fine, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice soft and gentle. Ethan's chest tightened. She was in pain, clearly, but she wasn't letting it stop her from showing kindness. That kind of strength couldn't be measured in numbers or charts. It was something deeper, something he hadn't expected to find when he walked through the door tonight. The rest of the diner seemed ready to move on, the clatter of forks and hum of conversation slowly resuming. But Ethan kept watching. Every small detail pressed into him. The way she shifted the weight of a tray against her hip to balance it. The way her good arm trembled as though it might give out. The way she avoided looking at her boss for too long. She carried on as though she had something to prove, or maybe nothing left to lose. When she returned to the counter, she flexed her fingers gently, wincing before reaching for another tray. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his coffee cooling untouched in front of him. What kind of life drove someone to keep working like this? Who was she carrying this burden for? He had come to investigate sales reports, but what pulled at him now had nothing to do with business. A part of him wanted to intervene immediately, to stand up and tell the manager to stop, to take the tray from her hands and demand she rest. But he couldn't, not yet. Not without revealing himself. For now, he had to remain invisible, just another customer. The urge to break character pressed against his chest, but he swallowed it down. The night stretched on, and each moment seemed to sharpen the edges of the picture before him. Lila wasn't just surviving the shift, she was fighting through it. And though no one else seemed to notice, Ethan did. He saw the resilience in her step, the quiet courage in her silence, the fire that flickered behind her tired eyes. He knew then that this wasn't about spreadsheets or profit margins anymore. It was about something far greater. He had stumbled upon a story hidden beneath the neon lights of a small-town diner, a story about strength and survival. And though she had no idea, this waitress with a broken arm was about to change his life just as much as he might change hers. What Ethan discovered that night would not be written in numbers. It would be written in the heart of a young woman who refused to give up, no matter how much the world tried to push her down. And for the first time in years, he felt the weight of his own promises return. Promises he had made long ago to people like his mother, people like Lila. He had sworn that if he ever had the power to make a difference, he would never let someone like her go unseen. He didn't know it yet, but this night was only the beginning. The morning after the crash of dishes and whispered apologies, the diner looked different, quieter, but the memory of that moment lingered with Ethan like a stone in his pocket. He had left the night before without revealing himself, slipping out among the last few customers, but sleep had not come easily. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the young woman's cast-bound arm, the way her face flushed as the manager scolded her, the way she smiled for a child as though nothing else mattered. That smile haunted him. Now, sitting again at the corner booth, Ethan blended in as usual. The coffee steamed in his cup, the hum of the neon sign buzzed faintly above the door, and life moved on around him. But his eyes never strayed far from the waitress. Lila. He had caught her name when the manager barked it across the room. Short, sharp, said as though it were a nuisance on his tongue. She moved slower today, not because she wanted to, but because her body demanded it. She favored her good arm, carrying plates pressed against her hip, shifting mugs with careful precision. The cast pulled at her shoulder with each movement, and when she thought no one was looking, she rolled it gently, a fleeting gesture of pain breaking through her mask. Ethan noticed everything. He noticed how she forced herself to keep moving, how she tucked stray strands of hair back with a trembling hand, how her smile for customers always seemed real even when exhaustion pressed into her eyes. It wasn't just the broken arm that weighed her down. Ethan had seen enough people in his life to know when someone carried invisible burdens. And Lila's were heavy. At one point, she slipped through the swinging door into the back, and he followed her with his eyes. He caught a glimpse of her pausing by the sink, her shoulders sagging as if she had finally let herself breathe for just a moment. She didn't notice him watching from the corner of the dining room, and he pretended to glance out the window, though his chest tightened at the sight. When another server came through the door, Lila straightened instantly, pulling her apron tight and fixing her smile again. The performance resumed. Hours passed, and Ethan kept his role, sipping coffee, pretending to read a newspaper while really collecting details. He learned more from silence than from words. Lila never complained, not once. When a table left without tipping, she cleared it quietly. When a customer snapped impatiently about cold fries, she apologized and hurried back, though Ethan had seen her deliver them steaming hot moments earlier. The manager watched her constantly, his frown like a shadow. Ethan's blood burned at the unfairness. But anger alone wouldn't help. He needed to understand. He needed the truth behind this girl's broken arm and tired smile. That night, as the diner closed, Ethan lingered in his booth, pretending to count coins for his bill. Through the window, he saw her emerge later, long after most of the staff had gone. She stepped into the cool air with her jacket hanging loose, clutching her bag close against her side. The cast made it awkward, but she carried herself with quiet resolve. Her car, parked under a flickering streetlight, was an old sedan with paint peeling from the hood. When she opened the driver's door, it groaned loudly in protest. She slid inside, adjusted herself against the seat, and for a moment, before turning the key, she dropped her forehead against the steering wheel. That small gesture said more than words could. Ethan stayed in his booth, hidden behind the glare of the neon sign, but his heart had already moved closer. He knew hardship when he saw it. He had grown up on it, built his fortune out of the cracks it left behind. And he had promised himself he would never ignore someone drowning in silence the way so many had ignored his mother. The next day, he returned, not because he needed to, but because something about her drew him back. He came earlier this time, and when Lila arrived, he watched her slip through the diner's back door instead of the front. She was early, well before her shift, and he wondered why. A curiosity tugged at him, so after a while, he left his booth and drifted outside. Behind the diner, near the dumpsters, he saw her again. The cast made everything harder, tying her apron, carrying crates of supplies, but she did it anyway, her movements efficient though strained. No one else was there to help, though clearly she needed it. She pushed a box with her hip, struggling until finally managing to shove it inside. What caught Ethan's eye, though, was when she paused. She thought no one was around, so she leaned against the wall, her face softening, her eyes closing as if she was bracing herself against a wave of exhaustion. She took one deep breath, too, then pushed herself off the wall and went back inside, shoulders squared again, mask in place. Something inside Ethan shifted. This wasn't just a worker who happened to be struggling through an injury. This was someone pushing through life with everything she had left. And yet, no one around her seemed to see it. Later that afternoon, he overheard two servers whispering by the counter. They didn't notice him close by, hidden behind his paper. "She's crazy for still working like that," one said, glancing toward Lila. "She doesn't have a choice," the other replied. "You know she can't afford to stop. Heard she's covering for her brother or something. Rent, bills, all on her." Ethan's eyes narrowed behind the page. It wasn't the whole story, but it was a glimpse. Pieces of a puzzle he was beginning to fit together. That evening, when the last customers drifted out and the staff began wiping down tables, Lila lingered near the register, waiting for her paycheck. The manager barely looked at her when he handed it over, muttering something about mistakes on her last shift. Her face tightened, but she said nothing. She slipped the envelope into her apron and left through the front door. Ethan followed again, keeping his distance. He watched her cross the street to a small apartment building with peeling paint and a flickering light in the stairwell. She climbed slowly, one hand gripping the railing as the other clutched her bag against her cast. From the sidewalk, Ethan stood in silence, his breath misting in the cold night air. He had seen enough to know that this story went deeper than he imagined. This wasn't just about one struggling waitress. It was about the invisible battles people fought every day, battles no one applauded, battles no one rewarded. And as he turned back toward his hotel, one thought echoed in his mind. He had come here undercover for numbers, for answers in spreadsheets and reports. But what he had found instead was a young woman carrying more than anyone her age should have to bear. And he couldn't walk away. Not now. Tomorrow, he would come back again. Tomorrow, he would watch more closely. Tomorrow, he would begin to uncover the truth behind her quiet strength. Because Lila's story wasn't finished. It was only beginning. The days that followed blurred into one another, but Ethan never missed a shift. He became a fixture in the corner booth, sometimes ordering nothing more than coffee, sometimes a slice of pie he hardly touched. No one questioned him. Diners were full of lonely faces, after all, people who found comfort in the rhythm of clinking cups and murmured voices. He blended in, but his reason for being there was sharper than anyone guessed. His eyes never left Lila. He watched how she limped slightly when she thought no one noticed, how she carried trays pressed against her hip because her one good hand trembled from strain, how she kept her voice soft and steady no matter how tired she looked. And beneath all that, Ethan began to sense something deeper. Her life didn't start and end at this diner. There was more beyond the swinging doors, something that pulled at her, weighed on her, demanded everything she had left. One night, as the staff cleaned up, Ethan slipped out ahead of her. He stood across the street under the cover of a bus stop, collar pulled up against the cool wind. He waited. When Lila finally left, he followed at a distance, careful not to draw attention. She walked quickly, her bag hugged close against her side, her cast slowing her pace but not her determination. The streets were quiet, and she kept her head down as she climbed the steps of the small apartment building Ethan had seen before. The flickering stairwell light buzzed faintly as she disappeared inside. But instead of going in, Ethan lingered across the street. A few minutes later, another window lit up on the third floor, and through the thin curtains he saw movement. Lila appeared briefly, shrugging off her jacket and setting her bag down. Then another figure came into view, a boy, maybe 15 or 16, thin, pale, his arm wrapped in bandages. He sat propped up against the couch, and Lila knelt beside him, smiling softly as though the weight of the world hadn't followed her home. She spoke, though Ethan couldn't hear the words, and the boy laughed weakly. The sound carried faintly through the open window, light but fragile. Ethan's chest tightened. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces shifted. Lila wasn't just working for herself. She was carrying someone else's world too. The following afternoon, he returned earlier, wandering into the diner just as the sun dipped low behind the rooftops. He asked for water instead of coffee this time, giving himself the excuse to sit longer. From where he was, he could hear fragments of conversations drifting from the counter. The staff talked when they thought customers weren't listening. "She shouldn't even be here," one of them muttered. "Doctor told her to rest." "And how's she supposed to pay for that?" another replied. "You know about her brother." "Yeah, poor kid. Hospital bills stacked up to the ceiling. She's lucky if she eats anything herself." Ethan kept his face neutral, but his fingers curled around the glass. He knew enough now to understand the truth. The broken arm wasn't the worst of her struggles. It was the weight of responsibility crushing her, the bills, the rent, the medical expenses for a family too young to carry it alone. She had no choice but to keep moving, even if it meant pushing herself past her breaking point. That night, he returned to the bus stop across from her building. Again, he saw her through the thin curtains, this time sitting at a small table with her brother. She was tutoring him, pointing to a workbook, her lips forming words of encouragement. The boy frowned at the page, frustrated, but she ruffled his hair and laughed, casting light over the dim little room. Ethan stayed in the shadows, heart heavy, thoughts tangled. He had built an empire out of hard work and persistence, but it had always been about numbers, expansions, deals. Watching Lila changed that. This was real. This was survival, quiet and raw. The next day, as she carried a tray past his booth, their eyes met briefly. She smiled, just as she always did, but for the first time he saw the exhaustion behind it, the kind of tired that didn't come from one night of bad sleep but from years of carrying too much. Ethan gave a small nod, one customer's kindness among the sea of indifference. She nodded back, and for the briefest second, it felt like she let the mask slip. But only for a moment. Then the smile was back, the mask restored, and she moved on. Hours later, when the diner was nearly empty, Ethan overheard the manager scolding her again. "You're slowing us down, Lila. One more mistake and I'll cut your hours. Got plenty of kids who'd take this job without the drama." Her lips pressed tight, but she didn't argue. She just nodded and went back to work, carrying her tray as though it wasn't her pride that had been bruised but something far deeper. Ethan's jaw clenched. The man had no idea what kind of fight she was carrying inside. He left that night with his mind made up. He couldn't walk away anymore. But he also knew he couldn't step in too soon. To help her, to truly understand her, he needed to see more. He needed to let her story unfold before rushing to rewrite it. As he walked back to his hotel, the city quiet around him, Ethan thought about his own journey. The years he had spent scraping by, the nights when his mother skipped meals so he could eat, the times when one broken car or one late bill nearly shattered everything. He had fought his way out, built something powerful, but not everyone was given that chance. Watching Lila, he realized she was doing what his mother once had, holding a fragile world together with nothing but grit and love. He couldn't help but think, what would happen if she broke completely? If her strength gave out? Who would carry her then? The thought haunted him into the night, and by morning, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't just here as an undercover CEO anymore. He was here as a witness to something rare, something that could not be measured in reports or balance sheets. And what he would discover next about Lila Hayes would not only leave him shaken, it would force him to face questions he had spent his whole life avoiding. The week dragged forward with a weight that seemed heavier every day. By now, Ethan had memorized the rhythm of the diner, the rush of lunch, the lull of the afternoon, the frantic dinner hours when every booth filled and the counter buzzed with restless customers. And through it all, Lila remained on her feet, carrying plates, smiling when she could, swallowing back every flinch when the weight on her good arm pulled her body toward collapse. It was on a Thursday night that the crack in her strength began to show. The diner was packed, louder than usual, with a youth baseball team celebrating in the back and a row of weary truckers lined along the counter. Lila darted between tables, balancing 3 mugs in her one hand, using her hip to steady a tray, always in motion. Her cast knocked against a chair as she passed, and she winced before recovering quickly. Customers barely noticed, but Ethan did. He saw every detail now. He could feel her exhaustion in his own bones. The manager's voice sliced through the din once again. "Lila, table 12 is still waiting. Move it." She hurried toward the kitchen, muttering apologies as she went. She slipped through the swinging doors, and Ethan caught a glimpse of her standing still for just a second, pressing her forehead to the metal frame as though gathering the last of her strength. Then she straightened, forced her shoulders back, and pushed through with 2 plates balanced precariously on one arm. Ethan's heart tightened. It was clear she was at the edge of something, one breath away from breaking. And then it happened. As she rounded a corner toward the booth of truckers, her grip faltered. One plate slipped, crashing to the floor, scattering food and shards across the tiles. The sound was sharp, a jarring echo that cut through the noise. Every head turned. Silence rolled over the room like a wave. Lila froze, her chest rising and falling fast, her face draining of color. She crouched awkwardly, using her good hand to gather the mess. But with one arm bound in plaster, it was impossible. Her hand trembled as she tried to pick up the jagged pieces, her lips pressed tight to hold back the sting in her eyes. The manager stormed over, his voice booming. "That's it, Lila. I've had enough. You're done for tonight. Go home. You can't keep slowing us down." His words rang out, cruel in their finality. A few customers exchanged uncomfortable glances, but no one spoke. The other servers looked away, pretending to polish silverware or wipe counters. No one moved to help her. Ethan sat rigid in his booth, his knuckles white against his coffee cup. Every instinct screamed at him to stand, to reveal who he was, to put an end to this injustice. But he forced himself to stay seated. Not yet. Not like this. His pulse hammered in his ears as he watched her kneel on the floor, humiliation burning in every movement. Finally, she rose, holding the shards of the broken plate in her good hand. Her chin lifted, but her eyes were glassy with unshed tears. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. She simply nodded once, set the pieces on the counter, untied her apron with trembling fingers, and slipped it onto a hook by the wall. Then, without another word, she walked toward the door, her casted arm swinging stiffly at her side. The bell above the door jingled softly as she stepped out into the night. The silence she left behind was louder than the crash of the plate. Ethan stared at the door long after it closed. He had seen people fired before, had let people go himself when numbers demanded it. But this was different. This wasn't about performance. This was about a young woman trying to hold her life together with one arm, and being punished for the weight of her struggle. His stomach churned. He couldn't let it end like this. He threw some bills on the table and pushed out into the night. The air was cold, sharp against his face as he scanned the street. He found her a block away, sitting on the curb near her old sedan. Her shoulders were hunched, her cast resting heavily across her lap, her head bowed. The streetlight above flickered, painting her in shadow and light, like a figure caught between breaking and enduring. For the first time, Ethan's heart ached not just with empathy but with anger. Anger at the manager, at the world, at the system that let someone like her slip through unnoticed. He started forward, but then paused. She didn't know him. To her, he was just another customer. And if he revealed himself too soon, if he stepped into her world without understanding it fully, he might rob her of the dignity she fought so hard to hold on to. So he waited, leaning against the corner of a building across the street, his breath misting in the cold air. He watched as she finally lifted her face, wiped her eyes quickly, and pulled herself to her feet. She slid into the driver's seat of the car, gripping the wheel with her good hand. For a moment she just sat there, staring straight ahead, her chest rising and falling as if she were convincing herself she could keep going. Then she turned the key, and the engine sputtered reluctantly to life. She drove off into the night, tail lights fading down the quiet street. Ethan stayed rooted to the sidewalk long after she disappeared. His thoughts churned like a storm. He had seen enough now to know the truth. She was carrying more than anyone should, and the world had turned its back on her. But she hadn't given up. Not yet. And he couldn't either. He would find out the full story. He would learn the depth of her struggle, the weight of her fight, the truth behind the broken arm and the boy waiting for her at home. Because what he had witnessed tonight was more than a breaking point. It was the moment before something larger, something that would either crush her completely or ignite a fire stronger than anything she'd ever known. And Ethan knew, deep in his chest, that he was meant to be part of what came next. The night after Lila had been sent home, the diner felt emptier even though every booth was full. Ethan sat in his usual corner, but the rhythm of the place had changed. Without her moving between the tables, the hum of conversation and clinking of dishes seemed hollow. The other servers bustled about, efficient but detached, their smiles thin and rehearsed. The manager's voice barked across the room, but none of it mattered. The chair she should have been slipping past, the counter she should have leaned against, the child she would have comforted, it was all missing. Ethan sipped his coffee without tasting it. He had waited long enough, played the role of a silent observer too many nights. He had seen her pushed past her breaking point, seen her walk into the cold darkness with humiliation heavy on her shoulders, seen her return to a dim apartment where her laughter for her brother hid exhaustion so deep it could swallow her. He could not sit in silence any longer. But timing mattered. He needed to approach her in a way that didn't strip her of the pride she held onto so fiercely. He knew what it meant to be pitted. He had grown up hating that look, the one that said, "Poor thing," rather than "fighter." If he was going to step in, it had to be with respect, not charity. The next evening, he lingered outside her apartment building, waiting. He told himself he was reckless for following her, for intruding into her private world, but the truth pressed heavier. He needed to understand her fully before revealing who he was. The light in her third-floor window flickered on. He saw her silhouette moving back and forth, the boy's smaller frame seated at the table. Even from across the street, Ethan could tell she was tired. Her movements were slower, her shoulders hunched. Yet when she bent down to speak to her brother, her posture shifted. She lit herself up for him, smiling, encouraging. The boy laughed at something she said, his thin shoulders shaking, and Ethan felt something twist in his chest. That laugh was why she worked herself raw, why she carried trays on one arm until she nearly collapsed. That laugh was the anchor keeping her from drowning. The next day, Ethan didn't go to the diner. Instead, he went straight to the hospital. He still had his connections, doctors, administrators, staff who remembered him from philanthropic donations his company had made quietly over the years. He didn't ask directly about Lila, not yet, but he made general inquiries, asked about youth cases, long-term injuries. He didn't need names, he needed context. And what he learned painted the outline of her story. A car accident a year ago, a boy pulled from the wreckage alive but damaged, medical bills mounting like bricks in a wall, a sister barely past 20 stepping in as guardian and provider. By the time he left the hospital, his jaw was set. He knew enough now. That night, he returned to the diner, though she wasn't there. The manager strutted about, full of his usual impatience, and Ethan's decision hardened further. Soon, very soon, he would end this charade. The following evening, she returned. Her uniform hung more loosely than before, her face pale beneath the neon glow. But she was back, carrying trays, apologizing for her absence, determined not to give up. Her cast was smudged now, the once bright plaster dulled with stains. Ethan watched as she smiled at customers, though her hand trembled from the weight she bore. Halfway through the evening, a tray tipped again. This time she caught it, but her body wavered, and for a moment she looked as though she might collapse. A ripple of concern moved through a few tables, but the manager only frowned. Careful, Lila. You're on thin ice. That was it. Ethan rose from his booth, the decision no longer a choice but a necessity. He walked slowly across the room, his presence quiet but commanding. For the first time, Lila noticed him fully, not as a customer in the corner, but as someone standing directly in front of her. "You need a break," he said softly, his voice steady but low enough not to draw everyone's attention. "Sit down for a moment." She blinked at him, startled. I'm fine," she whispered, shaking her head. "It's just been a long week." But Ethan didn't move. His eyes locked on hers, and for the first time, she seemed to see something she hadn't before. Authority, weight, something deeper than casual concern. Her lips parted as if to ask who he was, but before she could, the manager strode over. "Sir, can I help you? She's working. If you've got a complaint, bring it to me." Ethan turned, his jaw tightening, and in that instant the mask he had worn for weeks slipped. His voice carried differently now, firm and unshakable. "Yes, I do have a complaint. And it's with you." The manager's face twisted. "Excuse me." Ethan reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and slid a sleek black card onto the counter. The embossed logo caught the neon light. A murmur rippled through the nearest tables. The manager's eyes widened as he read the name. Ethan Cross. The room seemed to still. Lila's breath caught, confusion and shock flashing across her face. Ethan straightened, his voice calm but carrying the weight of finality. "I'm not just another customer. I own this place. Every table, every counter, every plate you break and every word you spit at your staff, this diner belongs to me. And I've been watching." The manager stammered, his bluster collapsing under the truth. I didn't realize." "No," Ethan cut him off, his voice sharp now. You didn't realize how to treat people with basic decency. You didn't realize that the person you've been pushing to the edge is stronger than you'll ever be. And you didn't realize that your behavior ends tonight." Gasps spread among the staff, whispers darting across the room. Lila stood frozen, her face pale, her cast pressed against her side. She looked at Ethan as though he had stepped out of another world, her lips parting but no words forming. Ethan turned back to her, his expression softening. "You don't have to do this alone anymore." Her eyes shimmered, confusion and disbelief clashing with the fierce pride she held onto. She shook her head slightly, as if to deny what she'd heard. But Ethan's gaze was steady, unyielding. "This isn't pity," he said gently, leaning closer so only she could hear. "This is recognition. You've carried more than anyone should have to, and I see you. I see everything you fought for, and I won't let it go unnoticed any longer." The diner buzzed with whispers, the stunned silence broken by the hum of gossip. But for Ethan, the world narrowed to the young woman before him, her broken arm, her tired smile, her unshakable will. And in that moment, he knew, this was only the beginning of what he would do for her. Because what came next wasn't just about saving a diner. It was about saving a life that deserved far more than quiet suffering. The diner was silent after Ethan's revelation, the kind of silence that pressed on the walls and made the hum of the neon lights sound louder than it should. The manager stood stiff, his jaw working as if he wanted to speak, but no words could find their way out. The servers lingered by the counter, uncertain whether to continue serving or just keep watching. Customers whispered behind cupped hands, their eyes darting between Lila, who stood pale and rigid in her stained uniform, and Ethan, who suddenly seemed like he didn't belong in this small-town diner at all. Ethan could feel the weight of everyone's stares, but he didn't care. His focus was fixed on Lila, who looked like she was caught between running out the door and collapsing right where she stood. She didn't speak. Her good hand clenched into a fist at her side as if she were bracing herself for something. An attack, a lecture, a pity-filled speech. But Ethan's voice, when it came, wasn't sharp. It was quiet. "You've been carrying too much on your own," he said, the words simple, but his tone held the kind of certainty that wouldn't be argued with. "That ends tonight." Lila blinked, her throat bobbing as she swallowed hard. Why are you doing this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan hesitated, because the truth wasn't simple. He could have told her that she reminded him of his mother, could have told her about the years of struggle he'd witnessed growing up, about the promise he'd once made in the dark of his childhood bedroom, that when he had power, he would use it to protect people like her. But he didn't want to overwhelm her. Not yet. Instead, he said, because you deserve better. The manager tried to recover his footing, puffing out his chest. She's an employee. I was keeping her in line. That's my job. No, Ethan replied sharply, turning his gaze on him with a force that made the man shrink back. Your job was to lead. To set an example. To lift people up, not break them down. And you failed. He paused, his voice dropping to a level so cold that it cut through the air like glass. You're finished here. The manager stuttered, looking around as if someone might defend him, but the staff stayed silent. No one came to his aid. Slowly, with a muttered curse under his breath, he stormed into the back office. A door slammed. The customers shifted in their seats, the tension loosening, though curiosity still lingered thick in the air. Ethan didn't care about them. He turned back to Lila, who was staring at him as though trying to decide if she was still dreaming. You don't have to prove anything to anyone here, he told her, softer now, stepping closer. Not tonight. Not ever again. You've already proven more than enough. Her lips trembled. She shook her head, almost imperceptibly. You don't know me, she whispered. You don't know what I've done, what I've failed at. But Ethan interrupted, his voice steady. I know strength when I see it. I know resilience. And I know someone who's been fighting battles they shouldn't have to fight alone. Her eyes brimmed with tears, but she blinked them back, unwilling to let them fall here, in front of so many strangers. With a shaky breath, she turned away, heading toward the swinging doors of the kitchen. Ethan let her go. She needed space. He had made his move, but forcing her would only drive her deeper into the shell she had built. Later, when the diner had emptied and the staff had quietly trickled out, Ethan found her outside. The night air was cool, and she leaned against the brick wall of the building, her head tilted back, staring at the stars as though trying to find answers in their distant glow. You should go home, she said softly without looking at him. You've done enough. Ethan stepped beside her, not too close, giving her the space she seemed to need. I haven't even started, he said quietly. That made her glance at him, her brows furrowed. Why? You're a CEO. You could go anywhere, do anything. Why stay here? Because this matters, he replied simply. Because you matter. For a moment, she just stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then she looked away, her shoulders sagging as though the weight of the last few weeks, or maybe the last few years, was finally pressing down. I can't just walk away, she whispered. My brother, he depends on me. I don't have the luxury of dreaming about a better life. This is it. Ethan's voice softened. That's not true. You deserve more than survival. And so does he. Her chest rose and fell unevenly. For the first time, the crack in her armor widened, just enough for Ethan to see the exhaustion, the fear, the doubt she carried. I don't even know where to start, she admitted, her voice breaking. You start, Ethan said, by letting someone help you. The silence between them stretched. Somewhere down the street, a car engine hummed and faded away. The neon sign above the diner flickered, buzzing against the night. Finally, she whispered, and if I let you? Ethan turned to her, his expression firm but gentle. Then I'll make sure you never have to carry this alone again. I'll make sure your brother gets what he needs. I'll make sure you have choices again, real choices, not just survival. Her eyes shimmered, searching his face for any hint of insincerity. But there was none. She saw it, the conviction, the unshakable certainty. Slowly, as though afraid it might break if she moved too quickly, she nodded. It wasn't acceptance. Not fully. Not yet. But it was a beginning. Ethan didn't press further. He didn't need to. Tonight was about planting a seed, about showing her that someone saw her, truly saw her, and believed she was worth more. As they stood in the quiet night, the future stretched before them, uncertain, full of obstacles, but also full of promise. And for the first time in a very long time, Lila allowed herself to feel the faintest spark of hope. What she didn't know was that this moment, this small spark, was about to ignite a change that would reshape not only her life but Ethan's as well. Because in helping her, he would rediscover something he had lost long ago, the simple, unshakable truth that one act of compassion could change the world. And as the neon diner lights flickered behind them, casting their glow on the cracked pavement, the story of two lives entwined in quiet resilience was only just beginning to unfold.